In the lively village of Kambani, 3 boys named Tund, Kwame, and Sefu were known by everyone. The moment their laughter was heard down the road, people began to hide their baskets, close their windows and guard their goats. The 3 were full of mischief from sunrise to sunset. They were not wicked, but they were careless, playful, and always looking for something to do that would make others shout their names in anger or surprise. Tund was the tallest of the 3, quick with ideas that often got them in trouble. Kwame was strong and brave, never afraid to try any dare that came from his friends. Sefu was smaller and clever with words. He knew how to talk his way out of trouble when elders caught them. Together they made a noisy trio that brought both laughter and headaches to the village of Kambani. Each morning the boys would meet under the big baobab tree near the well. That was their meeting place, their secret base where they made plans for the day. Sometimes they tied leaves to a goat's tail to see it run around in circles. Sometimes they hid behind bushes and made strange noises to scare women coming from the river. Other times they climbed mango trees, shaking down fruits before the owner could even greet them. The villagers tried to warn them many times. "You boys must learn to respect people," old Baba Kato would say. "A tree that bends too far will break." But Tund only laughed and said, "We are young, Baba. We are not trees yet." The others would laugh with him and off they would run, leaving the old man shaking his head. Even the schoolteacher, Miss Sawadi, grew tired of calling their names every day. They arrived late, played during lessons and made faces behind her back. When she punished them they promised to behave, but by the next day they were back to their tricks. Still, they were bright boys and that made it even harder for people to understand why they could not behave like others. There was one person in Kambani they never dared to bother. Mama Asha, the old herbalist who lived near the river. She was a quiet woman, always dressed in long brown wraps, her hair covered with a cloth of deep blue. She spent her days gathering herbs, grinding roots and helping villagers who came with sickness or pain. Some said she could speak to animals, others said the wind itself obeyed her. Children were told to greet her politely and never to disturb her work. Tund once said, "Do you think Mama Asha really has magic?" Sefu laughed and replied, "Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But I won't be the one to find out." Kwame nodded, pretending not to be scared, but in truth, even he felt uneasy whenever he passed by her hut. There was something calm but powerful about her presence, something that made noise disappear the moment she looked your way. One evening the boys sat by the river throwing pebbles into the water. The sunset painted the sky orange and the air was still. "We have done everything," Tund said. "We have played every trick. There is no one left to fool." Kwame laughed. "No one except Mama Asha," he said jokingly. Sefu's eyes widened. "You're crazy. You want to turn into a frog?" They all laughed, but somewhere deep down the idea began to grow inside Tund's restless mind. For the next few days Tund couldn't stop thinking about it. The village was too quiet, there was no fun left. Even the goats seemed tired of their games. "Maybe just one little prank," he said to his friends. "We won't hurt her. We will just make her laugh." Kwame agreed as he always did, and though Sefu hesitated, he followed them because he didn't want to be left out. That night, the moon was bright over Kambani. The boys crept through the narrow paths toward Mama Asha's hut. They could hear the river flowing softly behind her house. The smell of herbs floated through the air. They peeked through the window and saw her grinding something in a wooden bowl, humming a song they did not know. Her eyes looked tired but kind, and for a moment even Tund felt a bit sorry. But then his mischievous side returned. "Let's move her walking stick," he whispered. "She will think she lost it." Kwame snuck inside and took the stick, placing it behind the door. Then Sefu tiptoed in and switched 2 of her clay pots, hiding one behind the curtain. They giggled quietly, trying not to make a sound. Tund found a bundle of herbs tied with string and hung it high on a tree outside the hut. When they were done, they ran back into the shadows, proud of their secret prank. The next morning they came back to see what would happen. Mama Asha stood outside her hut, looking around calmly. She didn't shout or search wildly. Instead, she smiled softly and said aloud, "Sometimes children forget that eyes are not the only way to see." She walked to the tree, reached up, and took down her herbs as if she had known where they were all along. She picked up her stick, uncovered her clay pot, and went back inside without a word. The boys looked at each other, confused. "How did she know?" Kwame whispered. "She must have seen us," Sefu said. Tund frowned. "No, she didn't. Maybe she just guessed." But his voice didn't sound sure. Later that day the boys met again at the baobab tree. For the first time they didn't feel like laughing. The game hadn't gone the way they expected. "Maybe we should leave Mama Asha alone," Sephew said quietly. Tund shrugged. She didn't even notice. What's the harm? But deep down, even he felt a strange uneasiness he couldn't explain. That night as they slept, Tund dreamed he was walking through the forest. The trees whispered his name and goats bleated somewhere in the dark. A soft voice said, "Be careful, Tund. Not every game ends with laughter." He woke up sweating and couldn't sleep again until dawn. The next day, Tund tried to ignore the dream, but everywhere he went, things seemed different. The goats stared at him longer than usual. The river sounded louder. Even the wind seemed to carry whispers. When he told Kwame and Sephew, they laughed, but their laughter was nervous. None of them wanted to admit they were frightened, yet none of them wanted to go near Mama Asha's hut again. Days passed and Kambani returned to its calm rhythm. The boys behaved better for a while. They helped their parents, fetched water and kept to themselves. The villagers were surprised. "Maybe they have changed," said Baba Kato. But everyone knew that quietness never stayed too long around those three. One afternoon as the sun burned red and the air felt heavy, Tund looked at his friends and said, "Let's go fishing near the river. We'll stay far from Mama Asha's hut." Kwame grinned. "As long as we don't see her, I'm fine." Sephew agreed, laughing again. They grabbed their fishing lines and headed toward the river, unaware that their path would soon cross with the very woman they tried to avoid. As they reached the water's edge, they saw her bending down to wash her herbs. Her blue cloth shone bright against the sunlight. She turned and smiled kindly at them. "Good afternoon, boys," she said softly. "I hope you are not up to mischief today." They froze, unsure how to answer. "No, Mama," Tund said quickly. "We only came to fish." She nodded slowly. "Good. Then may the river teach you what you need to learn." Her words sounded simple, but something about the way she said them made the boys uneasy again. The sun burned high above the village of Kambani. The air was hot and still, and even the goats had stopped moving, hiding under trees for shade. The dusty paths were empty except for three boys, Tund, Kwame and Sephew, walking with mischief in their hearts. Their faces glowed with excitement as they whispered and laughed together, planning something they thought would be the greatest joke of all. For days, Tund had been talking about doing something brave, something that would prove they were not afraid of anyone, not even Mama Asha, the old herbalist by the river. "Everyone in the village fears her," he said with a grin. "Even grown men walk faster when they pass her hut. But she is just an old woman with herbs. We can show everyone that she's not so special." Kwame nodded, his strong shoulders shaking with laughter. "Yes. People act like she's a spirit or something. Maybe if we play a little trick, they will see she's just like everyone else." Sephew hesitated. He kicked a small stone along the road and said softly, "I don't know. She never hurts anyone. She helps people. Maybe it's not right." Tund rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Sephew. We're not going to hurt her. We'll just make her confused for a while. Then we'll put everything back. It will be funny." Kwame clapped his hands. "Let's do it this afternoon. The sun is hot and everyone is sleeping. She'll be alone." Sephew sighed. Deep down he knew it was wrong, but he didn't want his friends to laugh at him for being scared. "All right," he said finally. "Just one prank. Then we stop." They spent the morning waiting for the right time. The air shimmered with heat. Women rested in the shade, men slept after working in their fields, and even the chickens were quiet. The boys crept through the tall grass near Mama Asha's hut. The small house was made of clay and straw, with a roof that glowed golden under the sunlight. Around it grew a beautiful garden, green plants, bright flowers and rows of hanging herbs drying in the breeze. Mama Asha was sitting outside, mixing something in her big wooden calabash. She hummed a slow, gentle song. Her face looked calm, her eyes half closed as she worked. The boys hid behind a tree and watched her. "All right," Tund whispered. "We'll wait until she goes inside. Kwame, you take the calabash. Sephew, you mix her herbs. I'll keep watch." Kwame grinned. "Easy." After a few minutes, Mama Asha stood up and walked into her hut to fetch water. That was their chance. The boys ran quickly to the table where the calabash sat. It was full of a thick, green mixture that smelled like leaves and honey. Kwame picked it up carefully, trying not to spill. "It's heavier than I thought," he said. "Be quiet," Tund hissed. "Put it near the tree." Sephew bent down to look at the bowls of herbs on the ground. There were many, red roots, white powders, yellow seeds and green leaves. He didn't know which was which, but he began to mix them together anyway. The air filled with strange smells. Some sweet, some bitter. He laughed nervously. "I hope this doesn't explode." Tund giggled. "Hurry up. Before she comes back." Just then they heard footsteps. Mama Asha was returning. The boys froze for a moment, then darted behind the tree, leaving everything in a mess. They peeked through the leaves. Mama Asha stopped in front of her table. She looked at the calabash that was missing, the herbs that were mixed and spilled on the ground, and the footprints in the dust. Her eyes moved slowly, calm but sharp. She didn't shout at first. She simply smiled. Then she said softly, "So this is how the wind plays today." She turned her head toward the tree and added, "Come out, boys. The river already told me you were coming." The three of them stiffened. How could she know? Tun tried to whisper, "Don't move." But it was too late. Mama Asha raised her walking stick, carved from dark wood with beads hanging from the top. She spoke clearly, her voice calm but strong. "You want to act like animals? Then live like them." A gust of wind rushed through the trees. The leaves shook. The ground seemed to tremble. Before the boys could even blink, a strange dizziness filled their heads. The world spun around them. Their arms tingled, their legs felt weak, and their voices came out as strange, high-pitched cries. When the spinning stopped, everything looked different. The ground seemed closer, the air smelled sharper, and the colors looked strange. Tun turned to speak, but instead of words, a loud "Brea" came out of his mouth. He looked down, his hands were gone. In their place were small brown hooves. He tried to stand up, but his legs bent the wrong way. Kwame and Sephu cried out too, but their voices were also bleats. The three of them looked at each other in horror. Their clothes were gone, replaced by short fur. Their ears were long and twitching. They had tails. They had become goats. The boys ran in circles, bleating loudly, bumping into each other, terrified and confused. Mama Asha watched them with calm eyes. She didn't laugh or look angry. She simply said, "You must learn to listen, little ones. Every action has its shadow. When your hearts learn kindness, your forms will follow." The goats tried to speak, but only bleats came out. They looked at her, their eyes wide with fear. Mama Asha lifted her stick again and pointed toward the forest. "Go," she said. "The world outside will teach you what I cannot." The wind blew once more, and suddenly the goats felt a pull in their legs. Without thinking, they began to run, first slowly, then faster. Their hooves kicked up dust as they dashed away from the hut, bleeding and stumbling. They ran past the tall grass, through the narrow path, and into the open field beyond the village. Birds flew up in fright, and the air filled with their cries. When they finally stopped, panting under a tree, the three goats looked at each other in shock. Tun's heart pounded. He tried to speak again, but only another "Bah" came out. Sephu's eyes were wide with tears. Kwame stomped the ground with his hooves, shaking his head as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. But nothing changed. They were goats. From far away, the faint sound of Mama Asha's voice floated on the wind. It was soft but clear. "You wanted to play," she said. "Now you will learn." The three goats stood there, trembling as the afternoon sun burned down on them. Their mouths were dry, and they felt the strange hunger that animals feel. The grass looked green and fresh, and without thinking, Tund bent down and began to eat. He didn't want to, but something deep inside made him do it. The taste of the grass filled his mouth, strange and bitter. Kwame tried to walk, but his legs wobbled. Sephu bleated again, tears running from his goat eyes. "Bah," was all he could say. The world had changed completely. Smells were stronger, sounds sharper, and the wind carried every noise from the forest. They could hear the river, the birds, and even the insects buzzing. In the distance, the village of Kambani went on as usual. No one knew that the three troublemakers had vanished. The elders thought they were playing somewhere, the women thought they were helping their parents, and the children wondered why they hadn't come to make noise at the well. Back near the river, Mama Asha sat quietly in her hut. She placed the calabash back on the table, cleaned her herbs, and whispered a short prayer. "May they find wisdom," she said. "May their hearts soften like the soil after rain." Tund, Kwame, and Sephu ran through the bush, their new goat bodies stumbling and sliding on the rough ground. The wind rushed past their ears and their hooves kicked up dry dust. Their hearts beat fast with fear. They did not know where they were going, only that they had to get away from Mama Asha's hut. Their bleating filled the air, echoing between the trees. When they finally stopped, they were far from the village. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky orange and red. The forest around them was dark and full of strange sounds, crickets, frogs, and the distant howl of something wild. Tund looked at his friends. Kwame was breathing hard, his goat sides rising and falling quickly. Sephu stood frozen, his eyes wide with confusion. They tried to speak, but no human words came out. Only bleats. The sound of it scared them even more. Tund stomped his hooves in anger. He tried to shout, "This can't be real," but it came out as a long, sad brea. Kwame lowered his head and groaned. Sephu started to cry, soft and frightened. Night came fast. The forest turned black. The boys, now goats, huddled close together under a tree. The air grew cold. They could hear rustling in the bushes and the distant cry of hyenas. None of them slept much. They were too scared. Every sound made them jump. When morning came, the light hurt their eyes. Their stomachs growled with hunger. They walked around searching for food, but there was nothing they knew how to eat. Finally, Tun sniffed at a patch of grass and without thinking started to chew. The taste was bitter, but his hunger made him eat more. Kwame and Sephu followed. They felt strange doing it, but the grass filled their bellies and gave them a little strength. Days began to pass slowly. The boys wandered through the bush, not knowing how to return home. Sometimes they came near the village, but dogs barked and chased them away. The boys had never been afraid of dogs before, but now they were just goats and the dogs saw them as prey. Once, Kwame tried to run into the yard of his own house. His little sister saw him and laughed, clapping her hands. "Look, a funny goat," she shouted. He bleated as loudly as he could, hoping she would know it was him, but she only threw pebbles to make him go away. He ran until he could no longer hear her voice. Rain came one night, cold and heavy. The drops soaked their fur and turned the ground to mud. The three goats stood together under a small tree, shaking and miserable. They missed the warmth of their beds, their dry clothes and the food their mothers cooked. Sephu bleated softly as if whispering a prayer. He remembered how Mama Asha had looked at them before she changed them. Her calm eyes haunted him. He began to understand that she had not cursed them to be cruel, she wanted them to learn. On the third day they reached a small clearing with a stream. They drank eagerly, their reflections rippling in the water. For a moment, Tun stared at his reflection. His eyes were still the same, but everything else was not. He saw how foolish they had been, how their laughter had turned into sorrow. He thought about all the times villagers had warned them to stop being troublesome. Now no one could hear their apologies. Kwame tried to comfort Sephu by rubbing his head against him. They had started to understand each other's bleats, not as words but as feelings. Hunger, sadness, fear, all of it passed between them like quiet messages. In their silence, they began to care for one another more deeply than before. One afternoon they wandered near a field. A farmer was there, spreading seeds. The smell of maize filled the air and the goats' stomachs growled. Without thinking, Kwame rushed forward and began eating the young leaves. The farmer shouted and threw a stick. It hit Kwame's side, making him cry out. The man chased them away, waving his hoe. The boys ran until their legs ached. When they stopped, Kwame was limping. Tund and Sephu stood beside him, worried. Tund tried to help him walk, pushing gently with his head. It took them a long time to find a safe place to rest. They stayed there all night, quiet and tired. The world was no longer fun or full of games. It was big, hard, and unfriendly. That night, as they lay under the stars, Sephu looked up at the sky. He remembered the stories his grandmother used to tell, about how people who forgot kindness were sometimes turned into animals to learn wisdom. Maybe, he thought, this was what was happening to them. He wished he could tell Mama Asha that they were sorry. The next morning they followed a narrow path through the woods. Birds sang above and sunlight fell through the leaves. The forest was beautiful, but they were too hungry to notice. They chewed dry leaves and searched for water. Their hooves hurt from walking so far. At noon they heard something, the sound of laughter and drums. It was coming from a nearby clearing. They walked carefully and saw children playing near a fire. There was food, roasted corn, fruit and water. The goat's mouths watered. Sephu looked at Tund. He shook his head, warning not to go near. But hunger was too strong. Kwame stepped forward quietly and tried to take a piece of corn from the edge of the fire. The children saw him and shouted. "Go away, goat," one of them yelled. They threw stones. A small rock hit Kwame's leg again and he jumped back in pain. The boys ran, frightened, into the trees once more. When they stopped, they were trembling. "Baya," Sephu cried softly, pressing close to his friends. They had thought being goats would be fun for a while, but now they saw how hard it was to live without help, without speech, without love. As evening came, they found a hill overlooking Kambani. From there they could see the lights of their homes. Fires burning, people laughing, smoke rising from cooking pots. It hurt to see what they had lost. Tund bleated softly, his heart heavy. "We belong there," he thought, though no words came out. "Not here." They slept on that hill, watching the stars and the soft glow of their village. The smell of food reached them on the wind, and their stomachs growled again. None of them slept much. They were too full of regret. By the 5th day they were weak. They had learned to drink from puddles and eat plants that didn't make them sick. They moved slowly now, no longer running wildly. They had learned to be careful. They had learned to survive. Once, they came across an old shepherd who was resting under a tree. He had a kind face and a soft voice. His goats walked around him eating quietly. When he saw the 3 new goats he smiled. "You look lost," he said gently. He gave them a little water and some dry grass. The boys stayed near him for a while, comforted by his calmness. For the first time since the spell they felt safe. The shepherd sang a low song and the goats rested at his feet. Tund thought of Mama Asha's words, "When your hearts learn kindness, your forms will follow." Maybe this man was part of their lesson. He was gentle and patient, everything they had not been. When morning came, the shepherd opened his arms wide. "Go where your hearts lead you," he said softly, as if he somehow knew who they were. The boys bleated in thanks and walked away. As they moved toward the river, the sound of water grew louder. They stopped at the edge and looked at their reflections again. They were dirty, tired, and thin, but something had changed in their eyes. There was no more pride or arrogance. Only understanding. The morning sun rose slowly over the green hills of Kambani. The air was cool and the sound of birds filled the sky. Near the river, 3 tired goats walked slowly through the grass. Their legs were weak, their fur was dirty, and their eyes looked sad and heavy. These were not ordinary goats. They were Tund, Kwame, and Sephu, the 3 boys who had once filled the village with noise and laughter. Now they had been goats for many long days, and their hearts were full of regret. They had learned how hard life could be. They had slept in the rain, run from dogs, and eaten dry leaves when nothing else could be found. They had missed their homes, their families, and the comfort of being human. Every day had felt longer than the one before. But on this morning something inside them changed. It was not just hunger or pain. It was the quiet feeling that they had finally understood what Mama Asha had wanted them to learn. Tund stopped on the path and looked toward the river. The sound of water made him remember her soft voice and calm eyes. Kwame bleated softly beside him as if to say, "Let's go." Sephu nodded, his small goat face turned toward the direction of her hut. Without another sound they began to walk. The path to Mama Asha's home was familiar but different now. The trees seemed taller, the wind gentler. Every sound felt clearer, the rustle of leaves, the buzzing of insects, the distant hum of the village. They moved slowly, limping from the many days of wandering. When they finally reached the edge of the clearing where her hut stood, they stopped. Smoke rose gently from the roof, and the smell of herbs filled the air. Mama Asha was sitting outside, pounding something in a wooden bowl. Her back was straight and her face looked calm as always. She didn't seem surprised when she saw them standing there. In fact, she smiled as if she had been waiting for them all along. The goats stepped closer. Their hooves made soft sounds on the dry ground. They stopped a few steps away and lowered their heads. Their eyes filled with tears. They couldn't speak, but their hearts were full of apology. They wanted to tell her everything, how sorry they were, how much they had learned, how they wished they had listened before. Mama Asha looked at them quietly. For a moment no one moved. The only sound was the soft wind passing through the trees. Then she put down her bowl, took her walking stick and stood up. She walked toward them slowly, her long wrap brushing the grass. When she reached them, she said in a gentle voice, "You have come back." The goats bleated softly. Mama Asha nodded. "You have walked far. You have felt hunger and fear. You have been chased and cold. And now you understand what it means to be weak and humble." She raised her walking stick and touched the ground lightly with it. "The heart learns best through experience," she said. "And your hearts have now learned." Tund lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes were wet. In that moment, Mama Asha saw everything she needed to see. The pride that had once filled him was gone. In its place was something better, understanding. "Now you understand," she said again, her voice soft but full of power. She tapped her stick on the ground. There was a sudden flash of light, bright and warm. The goats closed their eyes. The air seemed to hum around them and a wave of heat ran through their bodies. They felt their legs stretch, their hooves disappear, their fur fade away. The world spun for a moment and then everything was still. When they opened their eyes they were no longer goats. Tund looked at his hands, real hands covered in mud. Kwame touched his face, feeling skin instead of fur. Sephu sat down and stared at his feet, crying softly. They were human again. Their clothes were torn and dirty, their hair messy, but they didn't care. They were themselves once more. For a long moment none of them spoke. They just sat on the ground, breathing hard, feeling the earth under their fingers. Then Tund bowed deeply before Mama Asha. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was shaky but full of truth. Kwame and Sephew followed, kneeling and bowing low. Tears ran down their faces. Mama Asha looked at them kindly. "You have seen how the world feels when you take kindness for granted," she said. "Now you know what it means to live without respect and care. Remember this always." The boys nodded. They couldn't stop crying. They remembered the cold nights, the hunger, and the fear. They remembered the pain of not being understood, of wanting to speak but only being able to bleat. They remembered how they had hurt others and thought it was fun. Now they knew how wrong they had been. Mama Asha smiled softly. "The river washes away dirt," she said. "But only the heart can wash away pride. Go now, boys. Live better than before." She turned back toward her hut, but the boys stayed on their knees for a while, silent and grateful. When they finally stood, the morning sun was higher in the sky. The light touched the river and made it shine like gold. As they walked back toward the village, their feet sank into the soft earth. Every step felt different, heavy with memory but light with hope. They passed the trees where they used to play and the rocks where they had once thrown stones. Everything looked new now, as if the world had been waiting for them to see it properly. On the way they stopped at the edge of a small stream. The water was cool and clear. They washed their faces and hands, watching the dirt swirl away. Tund looked at his reflection and said quietly, "We were fools." Kwame nodded. "We hurt people who never hurt us." Sephew added, "And now we know how that feels." They stood there for a moment, silent. Then, for the first time since they had turned into goats, they laughed. It was not the loud, careless laughter of before. It was softer, warmer, the kind of laughter that comes from peace. When they reached Kambani, people were surprised to see them. The villagers had thought they were lost forever. The boys' parents ran to meet them, crying and asking where they had been. The boys hugged them and promised never to cause trouble again. They didn't tell anyone exactly what had happened. They just said they had been taught a lesson they would never forget. Later that day they gathered under the big baobab tree, the same place where they had once planned their pranks. The sun shone through the leaves and the air was full of life. They sat together in silence for a while, watching children play nearby. "Do you think Mama Asha forgave us?" Sephew asked. Tund smiled. "She did. That's why we're back." Kwame nodded. "We must show her we've changed." They agreed that the next morning they would go to her hut to help her with her garden. And they did. Every day after that, they carried water for her plants, fetched firewood, and helped grind her herbs. Mama Asha never said much, but she always smiled when she saw them. The villagers noticed the change too. The three boys who used to play tricks were now the most helpful in Kambani. They helped elders cross the road, shared food with younger children, and even took care of the goats, the same animals they had once laughed at. Weeks passed and peace returned to the village. Sometimes, when the sun was setting and the wind blew gently from the river, Mama Asha would stand outside her hut and watch them from afar. She would smile to herself and whisper, "The lesson is complete." The days after the spell were quiet in the village of Kambani. The three boys, Tund, Kwame, and Sephew, woke early each morning with new thoughts in their hearts. The world looked different to them now, brighter, kinder, and full of meaning. The same paths they once ran across for mischief now felt like places of peace. The same faces they once teased now looked at them with surprise and curiosity. Something inside them had changed forever. Tund was the first to speak of it. On their way to the well one morning he said, "We must do good things now. Mama Asha gave us another chance. We can't waste it." His voice was calm, not proud like before. Kwame nodded and lifted the clay pot on his shoulder. "You are right," he said. "We played with people's peace. Now it is time to bring peace back." Sephew smiled softly. "Maybe if we do enough good, people will trust us again." That day they began their new life. They went to the well early and helped the elders draw water. The old men and women were surprised. Some even thought it was a trick. Baba Kato said, "Ah, Tund, what are you planning now?" But when the boy only smiled and handed him a full pot of water, the old man's eyes softened. "Thank you, my son," he said quietly. In the afternoon the trio went to the fields. They helped a farmer repair his broken fence and chased birds away from the crops. When the farmer tried to pay them with roasted corn, they refused politely. "We just want to help," Sephew said. The farmer shook his head in wonder. "Maybe the wind really has changed in Kambani," he said with a laugh. Everywhere they went, people noticed the difference. The boys who once made trouble now spent their days fixing, helping, and caring. They fetched firewood for mothers, cleaned the well path, and even helped the younger children learn how to read. The village, which had grown used to scolding them, now began to smile whenever they passed by. But the most important change was how they treated Mama Asha. Before, they had feared her or laughed behind her back. Now they visited her hut every day, not out of fear but respect. They swept her yard, carried her water, and helped her pick herbs. She never mentioned the time they had been goats. She did not need to. Every time their eyes met, the memory was there, not as pain but as wisdom. One afternoon as they worked in her garden, Mama Asha said softly, "You boys are learning the way of the heart. The hands that once broke now build. The tongues that once mocked now bless. That is true change." Tund looked up from where he was watering the plants. "We did foolish things," he said. "But you showed us mercy. You could have left us in the forest." Mama Asha smiled. "The river teaches by flowing," she said. "I only let you flow through your own lessons." Kwame placed a bundle of herbs in her basket. "We understand now," he said. "It is not enough to be strong or clever. We must also be kind." Sephu nodded. "And we must remember how it feels to be helpless. We will never forget." The old woman looked at them proudly. "Then my work is done," she said quietly. As time went on, the three friends became the heart of the village. Whenever there was work to do, they were the first to arrive. When someone was sick, they ran to fetch Mama Asha's medicine. When animals got lost, they helped bring them home. The people began to call them the three good sons of Kambani. Children followed them around, watching how they worked and listening to their stories. One evening, as the sky turned pink, little Amina asked, "Why do you always help everyone?" Tund smiled and said, "Because once we forgot what it meant to care. Now we help so that no one else forgets." Sometimes, when the night was quiet, the boys sat by the river where everything had begun. They listened to the soft sound of water and remembered the days when they had been goats. They laughed gently, not because it was funny but because they were grateful. Those hard days had taught them more than any teacher could. Kwame once said, "When I hear a goat bleat now, I think it is talking to me." Sephu laughed. "Maybe it is reminding you not to be foolish again." Tund grinned. "It's a good reminder." One day, a group of travelers came to Kambani. Their wagon was stuck in the muddy road outside the village. The men tried to push it but it would not move. The villagers watched from a distance, unsure how to help. Then Tund, Kwame and Sephu arrived. Without waiting to be asked, they ran into the mud, pushing with all their strength. Slowly the wagon began to move. The travelers cheered, and when the wheels finally rolled free, the boys were covered in mud but smiling widely. The travelers offered them coins but Tund shook his head. "We don't need money," he said. "Just remember that kindness travels farther than gold." The travelers thanked them and promised to tell others about the good boys of Kambani. That night the village celebrated. The drummers played, the women sang, and the elders spoke of how much the boys had changed. Baba Kato stood up and raised his calabash. "Once they brought noise," he said. "Now they bring peace. Once they played tricks. Now they play songs of goodness." Everyone cheered. Mama Asha was there too, sitting quietly at the edge of the firelight. Her eyes were warm and proud. When the boys saw her, they went to her side and knelt down. "Everything we have become," Tund said, "is because of you." She shook her head. "No," she said gently. "It is because of what was already inside you. I only helped you see it." Kwame looked at her with shining eyes. "We will never forget what you taught us," he said. She smiled. "Then my heart is happy." After the celebration, the boys walked home under the moonlight. The night was cool and the stars shone bright. They passed the fields where they used to hide for mischief, and the trees they once climbed to throw mangoes. Now those places felt sacred, like pages of an old story. As they reached the big baobab tree, they stopped. This was where it had all begun. Their plans, their laughter, their foolish dreams. They sat under its branches, listening to the wind move through the leaves. Sephu said quietly, "Do you ever wish we had not been turned into goats?" Tund shook his head. "No. It was the hardest thing, but it made us who we are." Kwame smiled. "Sometimes life must break you before it can build you again." They sat there until dawn, watching the sky change from dark blue to gold. Birds began to sing, and the first light touched the village rooftops. The boys stood up, ready for another day of helping, another day of living wisely. As they walked, they passed Mama Asha's hut. She was already outside, gathering herbs. She looked up and waved. They waved back with big smiles. No words were needed. The morning sun lit their faces, and for a moment, everything felt still and peaceful. In that light, the three boys looked older, wiser, no longer the naughty trio but the strong, kind hearts of Kambani. The lesson had ended, but its truth stayed with them forever. Years later, people in the village still told their story. Mothers would say to their children, "Do not trouble others. Remember the boys who became goats." The children would laugh, thinking it was just a tale, but the elders would nod, for they had seen it happen. And whenever someone did wrong, they would smile and say, "Go ask Mama Asha. She knows how to teach." The boys grew into men, honest and hard-working. Tund became a farmer who shared his harvest with the poor.